Good afternoon, colleagues, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome those of you who were with us this morning back to this afternoon session, and for those of you just joining us for this session, a very, very warm welcome. I hope everybody's managed to grab some lunch in between sessions, and that you're all comfortably kind of seated and situated in this online environment as we make a start on our afternoon session. This panel session is called Wellbeing, Inclusion, Kindness, Creating Communities of Learners After COVID-19. And we'll explore with the global pandemic highlighting accessibility to digital resources, just how we take that forward for our learners. So I'm delighted today to be joined by three colleagues who we are bringing together thanks to the wonders of modern online platforms across multiple time zones. You have no idea how delighted I am to have everybody kind of in this space. So across multiple time zones, I have great pleasure to welcome Heather Gray, who is Head of Department of Physiotherapy and Paramedicine from Glasgow Caledonian University, who is joining us, I reliably understand, from the West End of Glasgow this afternoon, and will very much be bringing a Scottish perspective to our discussions this afternoon. I'm also joined by Sean Michael Morris, who is Director of the Digital Pedagogy Lab at the University of Colorado in the United States, who is joining us very bright and early from Portland, near Oregon, as I understand things, at what is the start of Sean's Thursday morning. Just as well I know that Sean is very much the morning person in our panel. What Sean probably doesn't know, because I'm sure he's been fast asleep in terms of his preparation for today, is that in our earlier keynote presentation, Professor Sally Kift gave a shout out to the work of the Digital Pedagogy Laboratory. So that was great. We just couldn't have asked for that. That was just in the presentation and it was fantastic to see. So to Sean, I just thought you would like to know you'd be mentioned in dispatches earlier on today. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Petrea Redmond, who is Associate Professor, Education and Technology and Associate Head Research of the School of Education at the University of Southern Queensland, Australia, who has very, very kindly agreed to burn a little midnight oil for all of us, has kindly agreed to burn a little midnight oil for us all in order to participate in today's panel. So in a few moments, I'd like to ask Sean, Petrea and Heather to take it in turns to tell you a little bit more about themselves and their areas of work. But before I do, I just wanted to point out that ahead of this session, all of our panelists have very kindly shared some resources which I know will be of interest and value to delegates. So just in case you haven't yet had the opportunity to engage these, can I just gently nudge you in the direction of the resources page on the conference website, where these will be available after the event. So at this point, I'm absolutely delighted to hand over to Sean so that we can hear a little bit more about his research and the work of the Digital Pedagogy Lab. Sean.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and mostly thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me to join the panel today. It's really great to be in Scotland. I've never been, so this is my first visit. So my work generally explores the intersections of teaching, learning, and technology, and sort of the humanizing of education, the effort to humanize education. Well, specifically, I look at the ways that education and technology can amplify or constrain students and teachers' agency and their ability to sort of take ownership of their own practice, whether that's learning or teaching. I've been doing this for about 21 years and focused almost entirely on digital environments, but always with an eye toward finding the human in the digital. I'm actually not, people often think that I'm like the digital guy and I'm a technology guy. I'm absolutely not. I'm we're focused on human beings. And I'm looking for ways to explore how we can teach through a screen and create equitable educational experiences and appreciate diversity, dismantling oppressive structures, really sort of in the tradition of Paulo Freire, who started a sort of a critical pedagogy approach. Digital Pedagogy Lab, which, wow, it was mentioned today, that's amazing, that's very cool, was I founded with a partner of mine, Jesse Stommel, in 2015. And it's an international professional development event for educators that brings folks together for a week in cohorts to explore all sorts of issues that have been central to my work, but also to the work of a growing community of teachers, librarians, learning designers, technologists, and a lot of other folks. At the lab, we cover areas such as data and privacy, digital identity, digital scholarship, and critical digital pedagogy. We look at issues of equity. We look at issues of diversity in education, and especially in online spaces. We founded actually Digital Pedagogy Lab primarily because we knew that there was, back in 2015, there were more and more people starting to need to teach online or being asked to teach online in a variety of capacities, and with a variety of different kinds of technologies without any really good understanding or training around how that work happens. As we know, at least here in the States, the case is that most folks who teach in higher education don't actually have any background in pedagogy. They just have a background in their field. And so they tend to teach in the way that they were taught. But most of them haven't taught or taken classes online, so they don't actually have any sort of received tradition for online practice. So what we were trying to do was really provide a space for people who were struggling to teach in online or digitally inflected spaces, to learn a little bit more about how that can happen, and also to try to figure out ways to help them bring their pedagogy, the pedagogy that they value in their own practice, into a digital space. Because so often the technology kind of erases our pedagogy. And so what we were looking at is ways to make that not happen. And specifically, again, around the idea of humanizing education, which is sort of what I wrote about in the piece for today, really looking at the human aspect of this pivot to online in the wake of COVID-19, and how that's affected relationships between teachers and students, between students and students, but also how that's affected the ways that we engage with education when we suddenly have this distance, and not just distance, but actually a screen instead of a room, instead of a space at a school. So yeah, that's sort of a summary of my background and what I work with, and yeah, I'll end there.
Okay, thank you, Sean. That's terrific, and that's a great way to get us started. I kind of really enjoyed reading the paper that you submitted ahead of the conference. I thought that was really useful, and I think written very much from the heart would be my kind of observation. So from the heart and your experience of kind of working with students online over a large number of years. So thank you for that. I'm now going to hand over to Petrea to tell us a little bit more about the very exciting research work that she's been carrying out with colleagues from the University of Southern Australia. So Petrea, can I?
Hi everybody. Unlike most places, I have been teaching online for almost 20 years. So some people have found that living and teaching and learning have been very different and dynamic at the moment. And at our university, because 70% of our students are online, this has had a significantly less impact for us. So it's been interesting when people ring up or email or Zoom me and talk about, my gosh, what have I got to do? I'm in this space. I don't know how to connect with people. I've thrown this stuff all up on the internet, but I'm not really sure what anyone's going to do. And that's been the work that I've been working around. And as people negotiate these changes, the change in technology, the change in the way they need to interact with their friends, their peers, their teachers, things are very different. But the research does show that two things are critical to ensure that our students basically stay with us and we don't lose them. And one is your online presence as a teacher, and the second one is the student engagement, and that's about your pedagogy. And by presence, I mean that you're visible, or you're perceived to be available at least, and that you're responsive to students' comments and questions. And by engagement, well, if you're trying to define that, that's a very messy at the moment definition. There are lots of different definitions in the literature, but it doesn't just mean to engage with the content, which is what most people, as Sean said, most people in higher ed have very little, they have a passion for their discipline, but very little pedagogical knowledge, so that comes through. So my colleague and I were sifting through the literature, and we determined that there's 5 different types of engagement related to online learning and higher ed. And from that, we created a framework. And the 5 elements are social engagement, cognitive engagement, behavioural engagement, collaborative engagement, and emotional engagement. And in the resources section, you will find the article there, and the framework. And as you are planning for the next 6 months of teaching, and some of you will be planning for some hybrid teaching, some of it will be online, and some of you will be hoping to be face-to-face, depending on what's happening. But you might find that the framework's useful. Thanks, and I'll hand over back to you, Caroline.
Okay, thank you, Petrea. Thank you for that. I'm delighted now to be handing over to Heather Gray, who, as many colleagues who are in this online space with us will know, is currently leading a collaborative cluster as part of our current enhancement themes work. This cluster is considering student mental well-being, particularly around creating inclusive curriculum and learning environments. So Heather, I'd be delighted if you could say a little bit more about the work of the cluster, please.
Yeah, certainly, Caroline. I'm just noting here my envy of Petrea with her years of online learning experience. We're going through the extreme difficulty at the moment of trying to move hands-on healthcare programs such as physiotherapy and paramedicine into an online environment. So any help, Petrea, that you can give with that will be welcomed. So anyway, today, as you're just saying there, Caroline, I'm here in my capacity as the co-lead for the QAA Collaborative Cluster on student mental well-being and the curriculum. We started this, the work of this cluster prior to the current pandemic. The topic of student mental well-being and the curriculum was highly relevant then, but I think we can safely say critically more so now. So the aim of the cluster is we're trying to develop processes and resources that academic staff can use to design curricula and learning environments that are inclusive and hopefully promote student mental well-being. So the stimulus for this work of the cluster was the fact that pre-COVID-19 in the UK, 1 in 4 students was experiencing a mental health difficulty. But I think we can safely assume that this figure is much higher now. And also over 70% of students report that it's actually the academic work from the university that is their main source of stress. So we kind of need to keep in our minds that for students, the curriculum and their engagement with academic staff, these are their only guaranteed points of contact with the university. And again, even more so going forwards with predominantly online learning, and particularly for our new students coming in next session as well, certainly a concern. And research shows that having an inclusive environment that enhances the way students learn and the way that academics teach can promote mental well-being, so hence the importance of this topic. So to achieve the aims of this work, as a lot of you in Scotland will know, we've been hosting professional development activities, and we've been collecting data via workshops from students and staff from a wide variety of roles across Scotland's HEI sector. So for the purposes of today, I thought I'd summarise 4 of the kind of high-level messages from our work to date related to teaching and student mental well-being. Firstly, we need to consider the importance of academic staff role modelling well-being. And some of the aspects this includes acceptance, normalising, showing humanity, dialing down perfectionism, that's for me anyway, having compassion, using candour or self-disclosure as appropriate. Secondly, staff and students have felt that the main enhancements that could be made to the curriculum to promote mental well-being include things such as providing clear learning objectives, giving students time and staff time to learn the technologies so that all parties aren't becoming cognitively overloaded, carefully scaffolding learning, and no surprises, avoidance of over-assessment. Thirdly, one of the things that was coming out from our workshops was academic staff recognising the increasing need to partner more with students and engage in co-designing of the curriculum. However, they recognised that as being highly important, but then it was also expressed in one of our workshops as one of their main training and development needs. And then finally, we need to make sure that all staff know to where students can be signposted for further support. And within that, importantly, that staff convey positive messaging about the support services that are available. Just for noting, for those of you who are interested and are in Scotland, or no, actually not even in Scotland now, because it's webinars, not face-to-face. We've got 2 further webinars that we're going to be hosting later in the summer. One of these is going to relate to the aforementioned theme of partnering with students and co-designing curricula, so keep an eye out for these. And then you can find the resources from the work carried out on QA Scotland's Enhancement Themes website. Back to you, Caroline.
Okay, thanks Heather, thank you for that. I was in one of the webinars a couple of weeks ago and found that session to be absolutely fascinating. It was really good to participate in. So thank you to each of our panelists for giving us a much greater insight into the work that they're carrying out. The purpose, I guess, of today's session is really just to explore a number of questions and kind of work with our delegates to kind of pick up on things that are important to them in this particular space. So in terms of maybe just to get us off to I was going to say a gentle start, but actually the first question's quite a biggie. So we'll pick that up and kind of see how we go. So no pressure. I'm going to probably come to Sean with this question first. And then ask Petrea to follow up with us, and if there's anything further, then I'll swing by and ask Heather for her thoughts and views too. So I'd like to start with something that has actually come up through the conference. So I think this is something that has been probably picked up in all of the sessions that we've had over the last 2 days, and that's the fact that with the current global pandemic, highlighting accessibility to digital resources as not always being equal, what efforts can we make to make sure that all members in our communities are included? So that's a big question, and I'll hand over to Sean for his thoughts, please.
That is a really big question. And I think one of the things that we found actually in the wake of COVID-19 is that those sorts of equity issues have always been present, and that and like you said, they're just highlighted right now. And when I've been working with teachers around this over the last couple of months, one of the things that I've encouraged folks to do is to reimagine what they think of as technology and reimagine what they think of as ways to reach students. So a lot of folks think that they're strapped into the VLE or the LMS, or that they have only certain channels to reach out to students. And so I've been trying to encourage them to think widely about ways that they can reach students. Phone calls, text messages, getting on, getting students into a social media app, something like that would allow people to communicate on a regular basis, and to also recognize that different students will have to communicate in different ways, which puts a really difficult burden on the teacher to try to figure out how to stay in touch with everybody. One of the most important pieces that we've found that we've been talking about over here is to make sure that any technology that we're using is mobile friendly, because more people will have phones than they will have computers, and more people will have phones to themselves than they will have computers to themselves. There's plenty of students who suddenly found themselves at home sharing one family computer with all of their siblings, who are also all home from school at different levels and with different expectations from teachers and that sort of thing. So the mobile friendly piece is actually really important, but also looking at really asking students, like, how is the best way for me to communicate with you? How is the best way for you to be able to stay included in your education. I spoke with some teachers who early on, and I don't know how this all panned out, but I spoke with some teachers very early on whose students were contacting them and saying, should I just, these are higher education students, should I just drop out? Should I stop? Because I can't do this. I can't balance what's happening at home, and I can't stay in touch with class, and I can't. So there was all this sort of pressure around how do I even stay connected. So trying to keep that communication open is really the solution that we've been trying to figure out. Is like, just how do you just stay in touch? So that's what we've been trying to work on over here.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Petrea, can I bring you in, please?
So both the teachers and the students at school and higher ed places, and even vocational education training, people who work in workplace training, they're experiencing what I would call eco shock. They've moved to a different environment. It's like moving to a different country where you might not even understand the language.
Yeah.
So it's a different culture. There's different expectations, and this really impacts on their confidence as a learner and as a teacher, depending on which one they are, and also in their confidence of how to use technology. Because in some spaces, some people have thought themselves to be pretty savvy with technology, but that doesn't mean that they know how to use it for teaching and learning, and that's one of the issues. The other issue is the inclusivity, particularly for students who might have disabilities. So what are you doing for anybody who might be vision impaired or hearing impaired? You know, if you've got a video up there, do you also have the transcript or your script that you had, so that, you know, if I can't hear it, I can read it? And I totally agree with Sean that you need to choose mobile friendly tools, and you also need to choose some offline tools or activities so that they're not always online and plugged in. And probably, sadly, the biggest thing for everyone to remember is there is no secret recipe for this. There is no one way to do it. Just like all teaching, some things work for some students, and then you have to find other ways to reach out to other students. So that connectivity is critical, particularly during this time where you're really trying to be connected on two ways. One is their social and emotional well-being. Are you okay? And what can we do to help? And the second one is, okay, well, we are here for a teaching learning capacity, and let's see what we can do in that space.
Thanks, Petrea. Heather, I didn't know if you wanted to add in any final thoughts and comments on that.
Yeah, I suppose some of my thoughts when hearing the others speak. I think as well, because of this sudden move to online learning, I think sometimes the staff are feeling the pressure that, oh, suddenly I've got to use lots and lots of new technologies, but they don't necessarily need to use lots and lots of new technologies. I think that's a bit of a myth within this. Because really it's the pedagogy that's going to count at the end of the day, and things that they've been doing before, you know, are probably perfectly fine as well. I think what is more the felt gap is they're not seeing the students as much, and the relationships being affected. So it's all the communication channels, keeping in touch with them, you know, finding out the best ways of doing that as well. And also something else we've been looking at is quite a nice matrix that has bandwidth versus immediacy of responses as well, which, you know, helps you kind of to map out what types of mode of delivery might be the most effective depending on what your learning goal is. I can always share the link for that actually in the chat if that's of use. It's quite a good visual just to remind you.
Yeah, yeah, Heather, I mean, that would be fantastic if you could. I mean, we're gathering resources from the chat box from all of the sessions. So yeah, if you're able to share that now, or even if you just want to drop that in a wee note later, then that would be fantastic. So I'm slightly looking out of the corner of my eye. I don't know if my fellow panelists are keeping an eye on the chat box and the Q&A box. Chat box is going like fury, so's the Q&A box, and I think if everybody's happy, I'd just quite like to pick up a couple of questions there. So we've got some upvoting going on, and so we have a couple of questions that have really managed to make it to the top of to that chat box, to that Q&A box. So if it's okay, I'm probably going to take this first one to Petrea, and then maybe follow up with Heather after that. So our first question from Dustin is, how can we encourage staff to lower their own potential barriers and fears of collaborating / working with students, and what suggestions might you have? So yeah, Petrea, if I could hand that over to you, please.
I think one of the key things about all of this, particularly in terms of wellbeing, is that we need to look after our own peers, the other teachers as well, and share the load. So we have drinks every week in my university. Some people have, my husband's work, they have coffee once a week where they get onto Zoom while they're having their morning tea. So you can establish those same things with your students. So you can actually have a coffee and chat, either Zoom or forum, which is asynchronous, where those sorts of things can be experienced. That it's all about that connectivity. It's all about the relationships and making sure that we keep them hanging in there. And I think I'm not sure about your university, but my university is very good at communicating from the top down. So the students and the staff all get information and updates about what's happening next, what's happening now, what's happening next. And people have really valued that, just to stay connected, because the engagement, when you look at the different sorts of engagement, one of them is about engaging not only with the people that are in your class, but the university itself. So those sorts of things. We now do things like open days online, and we do also, and we've been doing this for a while now, but this year it'll be only online and we won't be going on campus. I imagine that the poor video men will be very busy running around the university taking some shots, so that that can kind of fit in with the asynchronous and synchronous stuff that's happening. And we even do a career fair for each different discipline, and that's online too. So trying to ensure that the teaching and learning is not just about what's happening right now, but let's look forward to what's next, trying to do that in a positive way. Having said that, we all need to offload sometimes, and often all we need to do is talk to somebody else who's having the same experience, and we feel okay after that. But for other people, that support needs to be significantly more. And in terms of, I think I'll just leave it there actually.
Okay, thank you. I think there's some interesting points there about, you talked about things like online open days and sort of those kinds of things, and about your video guys being very busy. I was really interested to hear at today's student panel about some of our reps being involved in kind of open days and then in induction programs and stuff like that. So certainly that ties in with practice and thoughts that have been shared by other colleagues today. Heather, can I follow up with you on this?
Sorry, the barriers or the next question? Sorry, Caroline.
Sorry, it's all right. Just stick with the barriers. So how can we encourage staff to lower their own potential barriers and fears of collaborative working with students, and what suggestions might you have? I guess for me, I was reflecting on an observation you shared earlier about losing the kind of the perfectionist drive all the time, and just whether you had something else to add there.
I think it's about, being kind to yourself and compassionate with yourself, and accepting that you don't have all the answers, you don't know all the technologies, and that'd be an unrealistic expectation. I mean, I tend towards perfectionistic tendencies myself, so I'm speaking to myself here when I'm saying this. Being kind when you make mistakes and things go wrong, like when you can't tune into the Zoom meeting earlier today, for example. You know what I mean? Give yourself a break. It's all part of the human condition. I think sometimes we've just got to be more human, and I think that's a lot of what's coming out in the narrative and the discussion at the moment, because I think, particularly, I come from a physiotherapy, healthcare background, and you've got drummed into you professionalism, and professionalism is actually a real barrier to kindness. if you're sticking to rules and being legalistic and living by the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, these things end up, you know, binding you down and, you know, causing you more problems. So I think these are some of the things I say to myself, you know, don't win the war every day on this one or the battle, but keep trying, you know, remind myself.
Okay, thank you. Sean, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
Again, to Dustin's question?
Yes, please, thanks.
Yeah. So part of what his question was figuring out ways for teachers to collaborate with students, and I think that what's been interesting about this shift to online is that teachers have also found themselves at home and teaching, like suddenly they have kids at home and they have to teach their kids, and so in so many ways all of our lives have changed, and I think that there's actually potential for, as Heather's saying, just to sort of let down your guard a little bit and say, yeah, I'm at home too, and my kids are here, and I'm overwhelmed, and you're overwhelmed, and none of us understand this technology, none of us wanted this to happen, and to sort of let that conversation take place. That's difficult for a lot of faculty because they have had this sort of experience of being at the front of the room, and it isn't what they expected to, you know, it's not the situation they expected to be in. But I think encouraging that actually is partly well-being. We take care of ourselves by sort of admitting that things are overwhelming. We help take care of our students by admitting that things are overwhelming and helping them admit that things are overwhelming. But then we also started to look at that sort of transfers into learning and how learning is happening. We can start talking more about, okay, does this work? Does that work? What should we get rid of? What do you really need? So just like asking students what technologies work for you, what technologies do you have access to, asking what forms of learning work for you. Do you need tests? Do you need deadlines? Do you need, you know, what will work for you? And I think that those sorts of questions can start to bubble up if we can sort of bring down that guard like Heather's offering.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for that. Okay, I'm going to dive back into this Q&A box of ours, and one of my colleagues from the Scottish sector, Dawn Martin, has a question here, and she's drawing on a point that Heather kind of touched on earlier. So maybe I'll go to Heather first, and then maybe follow up with Petrea after that. So Dawn's question says, Heather mentioned the importance of staff modelling well-being, and I'm sure that we all agree with this. Do you have any tips for staff managing their own well-being? And I think for us that, you know, that is a really important thing. So about staff managing their own well-being in these unprecedented times where workload has increased for many and most of us are still getting used to new technologies. So Heather.
So no pressure on this is what I'm hearing. Thanks very much. I think I'm going to plagiarize some stuff from the webinar that we ran recently, the cluster webinar, when we had Gareth Hughes, who's a psychotherapist, University of Derby, and works with student minds. And he, you know, was highlighting a lot of stuff in relation to this. And I'll kind of read through the list of things. And none of this is going to be new. And I'm looking at the list going, yep, you know, can do better myself. But in terms of, you know, well-being, it's back to the basics, things like sleep hygiene, and are you getting enough sleep? You know, obviously I'm a physiotherapist, so I'm obviously going to say exercise in here somewhere, or physical activity, including yoga as well if you don't want to do anything too heavy. So I've been doing my walks around Kelvin Grove Park here in Glasgow, for those of you who know that, and the Botanics, do a figure of 8 around those. There's evidence as well for mindfulness as well, meditation, fun as well, you know, trying to keep some fun in the mix here, you know. I know we can feel doom and gloom all the time. If you turn on the television at all, you're going to be struck with things that are not so pleasant. Focusing on the here and now and what you can control, what's within your own sphere of influence and what isn't, you know, work on what you can control. Remembering that this whole situation will pass, you know, it will. Stay connected to others, gratitude as well. And then some of the other things I was just saying earlier about trying to, you know, be kind to yourself and treat others the way that you would like to be treated as well. Be tolerant of people's mistakes, including your own as well. Another one for me is learn to stop when things are actually good enough. When you're doing something, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. And so focusing on the priority items, so looking in terms of learning and teaching, looking at your module or your program content, you know, what absolutely has to, you know, be taught, you know, what learning outcomes have to be met, and what other content maybe we're doing that was nice in the past, it was great, but maybe I can't fit it all in just now. I can't. And maybe actually I should have scrapped it before anyway. Well, you know what I mean? I was probably overloading all the students anyway before. So anyway, there's some things off the top of my head anyway.
Okay, well done, Heather. Well done on that. Petrea, can I bring you in to add to that, please?
I think we need to remember that for some people, this has actually been fun and inspirational, and it has enabled them to be innovative. So it's not all doom and gloom for everybody. There is a portion of the population for whom this is like, oh my God, I feel free to do some new stuff and take risks that I didn't before. And for people that have been, you know, working at home and online for some time now, a lot of those people that I've spoken to, those educators, go, you know, this isn't so bad. I'm kind of easing into this. I'm getting more comfortable with this. What my concern is, for most places around the world, this happened during the semester. So semester had already started. So you'd already developed relationships with your students. They'd develop relationships with each other. You'd develop relationships with the other staff. So what's going to happen when we have to restart again? And how are you going to develop those relationships when you're not going to see them? When we're still going to be in the online space? So I think that's something that people really need to think about. What are we going to do in the first couple of weeks that will keep students connected to each other, teachers connected to each other, students connected to the content, and still ensure that everybody's well-being is okay? So, you know, doing that check-in in a more social, informal way. Because if we, to be frank, if our students don't have what I would call Maslow's, you know, needs all pretty much sewn up, they're not going to learn anyway, because they're too busy worrying about, you know, am I going to eat tonight? Can I pay the rent? What am I going to do with my children? Do I have to pull them out of my private school? You know, there are a lot, particularly adult learners who might be part-time and family. You know, the school leavers, they're probably going, oh my God, I'm going to have to move back with my parents. You know, there are a lot of things that people are dealing with right now that we individually won't understand all of their issues, and some of them will share them with you and some of them won't. So, and it's the same with your peers. We don't know what's happening in the house next door, let alone in, you know, a colleague's house four or five streets away, or 4 or 5 suburbs away. So trying to keep that connection, you know, both for staff and students, for me is the critical thing about the learning communities that we want, both at the university, the large level, and both in my little course or tute level that I'm working with.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, although related into the conversations that we've had so far. Heather talked about kind of learning outcomes and did I need all that content, etc. And we've got a question here from Ellie, and she says, could all learning outcomes and or modules and units have a mental health section on learning in it? Something for the lecturer and the student to learn. So I think maybe in the first instance, I'll go to Heather and then I'll follow up with Sean on that. Sorry, Heather, to put you back on the spot.
Oh yeah, great, love it. Could all learning outcomes or have a mental health section within it? I don't see why not, if you wanted it to. You know, I mean, actually, I have the luck that I actually teach our physiotherapy students about mental health and about psychological therapies, low intensity cognitive behavioral therapies. So I definitely use that opportunity. Obviously, this is a very specific module, but when we're going through the materials that they would potentially use with patients, I'm saying, you know, you'll be using these with people, and we're all people in this room. So, you know, we look at the tools, you know, that they could use with patients. We look at those for themselves. So we look at you know, cognitive restructuring and thought diaries and behavioral activation and graded exposure and all these things. And I know that's maybe a bit too technical for most programs, but there certainly are, you know, very user-friendly versions of, you know, all these types of even just reflective thought records and things like that. Even people don't need to share them. They could just reflect at the end of a session, you know, or part of a module, reflect on their, you know, their mental well-being, reflect upon their thinking. Is there any unhelpful thinking that perhaps needs challenged? And, you know, not everyone needs to be a psychology lecturer, I would say, though I might get abuse in the Q&A section about that. Perhaps you don't need to have a degree in psychology, I think, to, like, you know, get the students to reflect on their mental well-being, you know, in this current time in relation to what they're learning, how it's impacting upon them, that type of thing. There are loads and loads of resources that are out there that could be used and incorporated within a module, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Sean, I'm sure you've got something to add to that.
Sure. I like the idea. I like the idea of including discussion around mental health and wellness in class. The thing that I would be concerned about would be that it would become an assignment somehow, that it become a rubric, that it would become graded somehow. I like what Heather's saying about doing, you know, journaling, basically, that is kept to yourself, but that maybe is guided, directed, or whatever by the instructor or by other students. I do like that idea. I would be concerned, and I'm not, like, I don't work in the field that you work in others, so I would be concerned that even if I were in a classroom, for example, even as sensitive as I can be about this sort of thing, that I would cross a line, that I would say something wrong, that I would cause harm by talking about it in the wrong way. So I'd be concerned about that. I would, not unlike when digital technology has become part of the curriculum and students suddenly feel funneled in a certain direction, I wouldn't want that to be the case with talking about wellness or mental health. And for some people, their mental health is actually part of their intersectionality, part of their social location, and we wouldn't necessarily want to have them have to reveal that sort of thing. So I would just be, I love the idea, because I think that having open discussions about wellness are really important. I'd be a little cautious about how that's approached, and I certainly would be difficult. I certainly wouldn't put it as a learning outcome, you know, because then it's something that we all aim for, or something that then can be evaluated in some way.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really interesting. Thank you. I've all of a sudden become conscious of time and can't believe just how quickly time has flown by. We've got, I think, maybe just time for one quick question, and I'll go with the one that's currently sitting at the top of our kind of Q&A box. And I think it probably ties in with, you know, some of the stuff that we've been talking about, you know, how things fit within the curriculum. So our top question comes from Fiona, who says, online work groups and chats can be mentally quite draining. How can we get students to feel more relaxed in sessions, and would tools like Discord with open chat rooms help? And I'm just going to go to each of our panelists for that. So some quick thoughts from Petrea, please.
It's the Zoom fatigue that people are talking about is very real. Like this week, I've had numerous days with 5 consecutive hours of meetings in Zoom. And, you know, you walk out of that last one and you go, I don't want to look at a computer again. It's, you know, I'm going out to walk with the dog or something. I need to get out of here. So I totally get that. And I think that we need to remember that, you know, those hours, contact hours that you have with students every week when you're in face-to-face, you can replicate that, but it is tiring. It's exhausting for everybody. And is it actually all that useful? Remember that there are unplugged stuff, and use breakout rooms if you're, whatever it is that you're using, so they can actually chat with only 3 or 4 people, because it's less exhausting. There's less visibility on the screen. It's less busy. and you're more likely to have a chance to actually have your say. So breakout rooms are a good way to kind of reduce some of that. And also remember, everything doesn't have to be asynchronous. So you can have synchronous stuff happening. And for some students who don't have the bandwidth to have good asynchronous stuff happening all the time, that's a solution for them, is to have some things that are synchronous, asynchronous as well as the synchronous. And I would suggest that you do both, rather than one or the other. And I think, as Sean said, you know, you don't need to stay within whatever the platform your school or university is. In this emergency situation that we're in, lots of people have gone outside their systems to other things. So whether that be social media or a wiki or a blog or something else that's not actually part of the system. And some students find that, because it's outside the university system, some of them find that actually quite freeing. And others are going, is it still the university? Am I still doing the university stuff? Who can read what I'm having there? So the privacy stuff can become an issue. But that's something that you can talk through with your students.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sean, is there anything quick that you would like to add to Petrea's thoughts there?
Sure. I actually really like the idea of using Discord, or sometimes I use Slack in classes. I call those technologies synchronish, because you can actually have synchronous discussions in them, or you can have asynchronous discussions in them. So people can kind of tune in and out as they need to. The only other thing I would add is that I think the idea of helping students feel more relaxed in sessions, I really advocate for ungraded space, unevaluated space. So if there's a discussion space or some kind of place that they can be where they're not being graded on participation or not being evaluated for participation, I think that will help them relax, because then they're really just there for the social aspect of being in school.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Heather, just final thoughts from you?
I'll be very quick. I have no idea what Discord is, but in terms of chats, if you're getting the students into these online chats, they finally, they suddenly find themselves in a group there. And oftentimes when we're doing it, they can't even see each other. They've just got to kind of speak. I would say, don't give them a really tricky question to work on straight away, because you're just going to have, they're all going to be sitting in silence, all afraid to speak. Give some nice, easy warm up, small talk, social chats to get the conversation going before they start tackling the harder learning outcome related questions. That's my top tip.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so colleagues, as I say, I'm conscious of time, and I do actually think we could have continued and kept this conversation going on for far longer. Hopefully everybody has enjoyed being part of the discussion. Apologies that we haven't got to all of the questions kind of in the Q&A box. We simply kind of ran out of time for all of those. I hope everybody's found today's discussions to be helpful. I'm very much kind of, reflecting on the stuff about, the being kind to each other, about kind of, being human kind of in that moment, about giving our students kind of, and our staff, options and possibilities. I think that's been really kind of useful to hear about. I think the comment about, actively going out there and using a blend of asynchronous and synchronous resources is kind of really important. I think particularly to address that point of living in an online space where we're zoomed out can really be very mentally challenging. So I think that was just really useful to have that point kind of reinforced. So yeah, as I kind of draw this part of conference proceedings to a close, on behalf of everybody who's been in this session today, I'd like to thank Petrea, Heather and Sean for joining us today. It's been really fantastic to bring the three of you together, and that's been a really interesting conversation. So thanks to all of you for joining us today.